The parking garage was nearly empty when the Mafia boss felt a small tug on his coat. He looked down. A little girl stood there barefoot, shaking, eyes red like she'd been crying for hours. Before he could speak, she leaned closer and whispered something so quietly it was almost lost to the echoing concrete walls. "He's not my dad." The words hit harder than a gunshot. Behind her, a man stepped forward too quickly, too tense, smiling when he shouldn't have been. "That's my daughter," the man said, reaching for her wrist. "She gets confused." The girl flinched. The Mafia boss didn't move. He just glanced at the exit ramp ahead, then calmly shifted his body, blocking the only way out. His men noticed immediately. Engines cut. Doors locked. The air changed. The little girl's fingers tightened around his sleeve as she whispered again, voice breaking, "Please don't let him take me." In that moment, the most dangerous man in the city knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a rescue. Stay with me until the end, because what the Mafia boss uncovers next will expose a truth so dark, no one walks away unchanged. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. Vincent Torino had earned his reputation through decades of calculated violence and unwavering loyalty to his organization. At 58 years old, he commanded respect through presence alone. His salt and pepper hair was always perfectly styled, his Italian suits tailored to perfection, and his steel gray eyes missed nothing. When Vincent entered a room, conversations stopped. When he spoke, people listened. When he made a decision, it became reality. But standing in that underground parking garage beneath the Meridian shopping complex at 11:30 on a Tuesday morning, Vincent found himself in uncharted territory. The concrete walls amplified every sound. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows that made everything feel cold and clinical. This was supposed to be a simple meeting, a routine collection, the kind of business transaction that kept his organization running smoothly. Instead, he was staring down at a child who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her dark hair tangled and unwashed, wearing a pink dress that was 2 sizes too big and covered in stains. Her small feet were bare against the cold concrete, and she was trembling not just from fear, but from the chill of the underground garage. The man claiming to be her father was nervous in all the wrong ways. Vincent had spent 35 years reading people, separating truth from deception, identifying threats before they materialized. This man's anxiety wasn't paternal concern. It was the desperate energy of someone caught in a lie. "Come on, sweetie," the man said, his voice artificially cheerful as he reached for the girl again. "Daddy needs to get you home. Mommy's waiting." The girl pressed closer to Vincent, her tiny hand clutching his expensive wool coat with surprising strength. She shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged cheeks. "No, no, no," she whispered. "Mommy's gone. He said Mommy's gone." Vincent's jaw tightened. Behind him, his 3 associates had already moved into position without being told. Tony Marcelli, his lieutenant for over 15 years, had positioned himself near the elevator doors. Frank DeMarco covered the stairwell access. Bobby Santangelo had moved toward the ramp, cutting off any escape route to the street level. These men had followed Vincent through gang wars, federal investigations, and territorial disputes. They'd seen him order executions without blinking, negotiate million-dollar deals over dinner, and eliminate threats with surgical precision. But they'd never seen their boss kneel down to eye level with a terrified child. "What's your name, little one?" Vincent asked softly, his voice carrying none of the menace that had intimidated countless adversaries. "Emma," she whispered, barely audible. "Emma Rose Patterson." Vincent's eyes never left hers as he asked the next question. "Where do you live, Emma?" Before she could answer, the man stepped forward aggressively. "Listen here. This is my kid. And I don't know who you think you are, but you need to mind your own business. We're leaving now." Vincent stood slowly, his full 6'2" frame unfolding like a predator rising to meet a challenge. The temperature in the garage seemed to drop 10 degrees. When he turned to face the man, his expression was deadly calm. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Vincent said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded criminal enterprises across 3 states. "Vincent Torino. And you are?" The man's face went pale as recognition dawned. Everyone in the city knew that name. Vincent Torino wasn't just any organized crime figure. He was the head of the most powerful family on the East Coast, a man whose word was law in the underworld and whose reach extended into legitimate businesses, political circles, and law enforcement agencies. I'm David," the man stammered, his artificial confidence crumbling. "David Patterson. This is really just a family matter. My daughter sometimes gets confused when she's tired." Vincent's eyes narrowed as he processed the inconsistency. The girl had said her name was Emma Rose Patterson, but something about this man's claim didn't add up. The way he'd hesitated before giving his name, the way he'd positioned himself between the child and the exit, the way Emma had recoiled when he reached for her. "Emma," Vincent said, kneeling down again while keeping his eyes on the man. "Can you tell me your daddy's name?" "Michael," she said without hesitation. "Daddy's name is Michael, and he has brown hair, and he reads me stories about princesses, and he makes pancakes that look like Mickey Mouse." The man calling himself David had blonde hair and carried himself like someone who'd never read a bedtime story in his life. Vincent's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his jacket, a gesture his men recognized immediately. The sound of car doors closing echoed through the garage as additional vehicles arrived at the upper level. "Interesting," Vincent said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "because you just told me your name was David Patterson." The man's eyes darted toward the exit ramp, calculating distances and escape routes. But Vincent's men had already eliminated every option. The garage had become a tomb, and Vincent Torino held the only key. Emma tugged on Vincent's coat again, her small voice carrying a desperation that cut through the tension like a blade. "He took me from the park. He said Mommy sent him, but Mommy would never send a stranger. Mommy always picks me up herself." Vincent's blood ran cold as the pieces began falling into place. This wasn't a custody dispute or family drama. This was an abduction in progress, and somehow fate had placed him directly in its path. The man's hand moved toward his pocket, but before he could complete the motion, Vincent's voice cut through the air like a whip. "I wouldn't." 3 guns appeared simultaneously as Vincent's men responded to the implied threat. The man froze, his face now completely drained of color as he realized the magnitude of his situation. Vincent's eyes swept the garage, cataloging every detail with the precision of a man who'd survived 3 decades by noticing what others missed. The man's rental car had mud on the license plate, deliberately obscuring the numbers. His clothes were wrinkled like he'd slept in them. Most telling of all, his shoes were wrong. Expensive Italian leather, spotless and new, completely out of place with his disheveled appearance. Professional kidnappers didn't usually wear $1,000 shoes. "Tony," Vincent said without taking his eyes off the man. "Call Detective Morrison. Tell him we have a situation that requires immediate attention." Emma's grip on his coat tightened. "Are you really going to help me?" Vincent looked down at her, seeing something in those frightened eyes that reminded him of his own daughter at that age. Sophia had been Emma's size when she'd first called him daddy, when she trusted him to protect her from the monsters that lived in closets and under beds. Before leukemia took her away when she was only 9 years old. "Yes, little one," he said softly. "I'm going to help you." The man calling himself David was sweating now despite the cool temperature. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding here. I can explain everything. Maybe we can work something out." Vincent's expression didn't change. "I'm listening. The thing is, I was hired to pick her up. Her mother, she's in some trouble, owes money to some very dangerous people. She asked me to keep Emma safe until she could sort things out." It was a practiced lie delivered with just enough nervous energy to seem believable. But Vincent had heard thousands of lies over the years, And this one had the particular rhythm of someone who'd rehearsed it multiple times. Emma shook her head violently. That's not true. Mommy doesn't owe money to anybody. Mommy works at the hospital, and she saves people, and she would never send a stranger to get me. Vincent's phone buzzed. A text from Tony, who'd stepped away to make the call. Morrison's 20 minutes out. Says to keep everyone exactly where they are. Detective Bill Morrison was one of the few honest cops left in the city. Someone Vincent respected, despite being on opposite sides of the law. More importantly, Morrison specialized in crimes against children and had a reputation for getting results. Here's what's going to happen, Vincent said, his voice carrying the calm authority that had negotiated peace between warring families and brokered deals worth millions. We're all going to wait right here until the police arrive. Then we're going to let them sort this out properly. The man's eyes darted again toward the exit ramp, but Bobby Santangelo had moved his black Escalade to completely block the narrow passage. Even if he somehow made it past Vincent's men, there was nowhere to run. I can't wait for police, the man said, desperation creeping into his voice. I have a schedule to keep. People are expecting me. Vincent stepped closer, close enough that the man could smell his expensive cologne and see the cold calculation in his steel-gray eyes. What people? Just business associates. Look, I'll level with you. The kid's mother hired me to transport Emma to her grandmother's house in Albany. Family emergency. But the mother, she's paranoid about official channels, doesn't trust the system. Asked me to handle it quietly. Another lie. But this one revealed something important. Albany was 3 hours north, across state lines. If this man had succeeded in taking Emma out of the city, she would have disappeared into a network that could move her anywhere in the country. Emma pulled on Vincent's coat again. Grandma Janet lives in Florida, not Albany. She sends me postcards with flamingos on them. The man's story was falling apart piece by piece, but Vincent noticed something else. The way the man kept checking his watch, the increasing panic in his eyes, the way he'd mentioned people expecting him. This wasn't a lone wolf operation. Someone was coordinating this, and that someone was probably wondering why their courier was late. Frank DeMarco approached from the stairwell, his expression grim. Boss, we've got movement upstairs. 2 black SUVs just pulled into the main lot. Tinted windows, out-of-state plates. Vincent's blood chilled. The coordination, the timing, the professional execution. This wasn't a random abduction. This was human trafficking, and Emma had stumbled into the middle of a larger operation. How many men? Vincent asked. At least 4 that I can see. They're not making any moves yet, but they're watching the exits. Vincent's mind raced through possibilities. His men were skilled and armed, but they were outnumbered and trapped in an underground garage with limited escape routes. More importantly, they had a 7-year-old child to protect, which changed every tactical calculation. The man was watching this exchange with growing terror, finally understanding that he'd walked into something far more dangerous than he'd bargained for. Listen, I can make this go away. 1 phone call and those guys upstairs disappear, but I need to take the girl with me. Vincent's laugh was cold as winter steel. You're not taking her anywhere. Emma looked up at him with absolute trust, the kind of faith that children reserved for parents and heroes and people who made them feel safe when the world turned dark. What's going to happen to me? Vincent knelt down again, bringing himself to her eye level. Nothing bad, I promise. But I need you to be very brave for just a little longer, okay? She nodded solemnly. Are you a good guy or a bad guy? The question hit Vincent harder than any bullet ever had. He'd spent his entire adult life being the bad guy, making decisions that destroyed lives, ordering violence that left families shattered. But looking into Emma's innocent eyes, he knew there was only one answer that mattered. Today, he said quietly, I'm one of the good guys. Tony returned from his call, his expression troubled. Morrison's running into traffic. Might be 30 minutes before he gets here. Vincent's jaw tightened. 30 minutes was an eternity when armed men were positioning themselves upstairs and a child's life hung in the balance. He needed to change the dynamics of this situation before it spiraled completely out of control. "Bobby," he called softly, "I need you to move your car." Bobby's eyes widened in confusion. "Boss? Move it just enough to create a gap. Make it look like we're preparing to leave." Understanding dawned in Bobby's eyes. Vincent wasn't planning to run. He was planning to draw the men upstairs into the garage, where the confined space would work in their favor instead of against them. The man claiming to be David Patterson realized what was happening. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. These people, they don't negotiate. They don't leave witnesses." Vincent's smile was sharp as a blade. "Neither do I." The sound of car engines starting echoed from the upper level, confirming Vincent's worst fears. The men upstairs weren't just watching anymore. They were moving. Emma pressed closer to Vincent's leg, her small body trembling as the rumble of approaching vehicles grew louder. The man who'd been calling himself David was now visibly sweating, his hands shaking as he checked his phone repeatedly. "They're coming down," Frank reported from his position near the stairwell. 3 vehicles, moving slow and tactical. Vincent's mind calculated angles and advantages with the cold precision that had kept him alive for 3 decades. The garage's layout worked both for and against them. Limited escape routes meant they were trapped, but it also meant the approaching vehicles would have to funnel through narrow passages, eliminating their numerical advantage. "Tony, kill the lights," Vincent ordered quietly. The garage plunged into near darkness, broken only by the emergency lighting that cast eerie shadows across the concrete pillars. Emma whimpered softly, and Vincent placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, little one. We're just evening the odds." The first black SUV emerged from the ramp, its headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Vincent could see armed figures through the tinted windshield, professional operators who moved with military precision. The man beside them was now openly panicking. "You don't understand," he hissed. "These aren't just criminals. They're part of something bigger, international. They have resources, connections, people in law enforcement." Vincent's eyes never left the approaching vehicles. "So do I." The lead SUV stopped 50 feet away, its engine idling ominously in the confined space. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a car door opened, and a figure stepped out. Even in the dim light, Vincent could see this wasn't some street-level thug. The man was well-dressed, moved with confidence, and carried himself like someone accustomed to command. When he spoke, his accent was faintly European, cultured but with an edge of steel. "Mr. Torino," the man called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. We're simply here to collect what belongs to us." Vincent's blood turned to ice. Emma wasn't just a random abduction victim. She was merchandise to these people, property to be bought, sold, and transported across international borders. "Nothing here belongs to you," Vincent replied, his voice carrying across the garage with deadly calm. The man stepped forward slightly, still keeping his distance but making his presence known. "The child was purchased and paid for. We have documentation, contracts, legal arrangements. This is simply a business transaction." Emma's grip on Vincent's coat tightened to the point where her knuckles were white. She understood enough to know these men were talking about her like she was an object, a commodity to be traded. "Purchased from whom?" Vincent asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Her mother, naturally. Maria Patterson, a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital who found herself in significant debt to some very unforgiving creditors. She made a choice to settle that debt in the most practical way available." Vincent felt Emma's small body go rigid against his leg. The child's whispered no was barely audible, but it carried the weight of a world collapsing. The man claiming to be David Patterson finally found his voice. "Look, I was just supposed to transport her. I don't know anything about sales or contracts. I was told this was temporary, just until her mother could pay back what she owed." The European man's laugh was cold and mechanical. "Mr. Patterson, you were told what you needed to be told to ensure compliance. Nothing more." Vincent's jaw clenched as the full scope of the operation became clear. Emma's mother hadn't hired anyone to protect her daughter. She'd sold her to human traffickers to pay off debts, probably gambling or drugs. The fake David Patterson was just a courier, hired to move Emma from point A to point B without asking questions. "How many others?" Vincent asked quietly. "I beg your pardon? How many other children have you purchased? How many families have you destroyed?" The European man's smile was barely visible in the dim light, but Vincent could hear it in his voice. "Mr. Torino, you're a businessman. You understand supply and demand, market forces, profit margins. We provide a service to people who find themselves in impossible situations. Everyone benefits." Vincent's hand moved slowly toward his jacket, a motion his men recognized and mirrored. The air in the garage became electric with tension. Everyone except the children. The children are well cared for. They're placed in homes with families who desperately want them, who can provide opportunities their birth parents never could. It's really quite humanitarian when you consider the alternatives. Emma's whispered voice cut through the lies like a knife. "I want my mommy." The simple statement, spoken with the heartbreaking honesty of a 7-year-old, shattered any pretense of legitimacy the operation might have claimed. Vincent looked down at her, seeing not just Emma but every child who'd been stolen, sold, and shipped across borders like cargo. "Mr. Torino," the European man continued, his patience beginning to show cracks, "you're interfering with a legal business transaction. I suggest you step aside and allow us to complete our arrangements." Vincent's response was delivered with the quiet menace that had terrified criminal organizations across 3 states. "I suggest you get back in your vehicles and drive away, while you still can." The man's composure finally slipped. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. You have nowhere to run and no backup coming. Be reasonable." Vincent's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "You clearly don't know who you're dealing with." As if summoned by his words, the sound of additional vehicles echoed from the upper levels. Heavy engines, multiple units, moving with purpose and coordination. The European man's head snapped toward the sound, confusion replacing confidence. "Expecting someone?" Vincent asked casually. Detective Morrison's voice crackled through a megaphone from somewhere above. "This is the NYPD. The building is surrounded. All vehicles in the parking garage are to remain stationary." The European man's face went white as he realized the trap he'd walked into. Vincent Torino hadn't just been protecting one child. He'd been buying time for law enforcement to position themselves for a coordinated takedown of an international trafficking operation. Frank DeMarco appeared from the stairwell, no longer hiding his position. "Boss, Morrison's got 20 officers up there, plus federal agents. Looks like this became a joint task force operation real quick." Vincent knelt down beside Emma, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and amazement. "Remember when you asked if I was a good guy or a bad guy?" She nodded solemnly. "Sometimes being a good guy means knowing the right bad guys to call." The European man was now speaking rapidly into a phone, trying to coordinate an escape that was no longer possible. His carefully planned operation had collapsed the moment Vincent Torino decided to block that exit ramp. "You set us up," the fake David Patterson said, his voice filled with disbelief. Vincent stood slowly, his full height casting a long shadow across the garage floor. "I protected a child. Everything else was just business." The sound of tactical boots echoed from multiple directions as law enforcement units moved into position. The European man made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Mr. Torino, we can negotiate. Financial compensation for your trouble. A percentage of future operations. This doesn't have to end badly for anyone." Vincent's laugh was genuinely amused. "You're trying to bribe me with money made from selling children?" Emma tugged on his coat again, looking up with the kind of trust that could break a man's heart and rebuild his soul simultaneously. "What happens now?" Vincent's voice softened as he answered her. "Now the good guys win." Detective Morrison's voice boomed through the garage as tactical lights flooded the space. "All subjects remain stationary, weapons on the ground, hands visible. The European man's shoulders sagged in defeat as he realized his operation was finished. Years of planning, millions in investments, carefully cultivated networks of corruption and coercion, all undone by a 7-year-old girl who'd been brave enough to ask a stranger for help. Vincent's men holstered their weapons and stepped back, allowing law enforcement to take control of the scene. As federal agents moved in to secure the trafficking suspects, Vincent felt Emma's small hand slip into his. "Thank you," she whispered. Vincent squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask." Detective Morrison approached, his expression grim but satisfied. "Vincent, hell of a thing you stumbled into here." "Hell of a thing that stumbled into me," Vincent corrected. Morrison knelt down to Emma's level, his voice gentle and professional. "Hi, Emma. I'm Detective Morrison. We're going to take you somewhere safe while we sort all this out, okay?" Emma looked up at Vincent with uncertainty. "Will I see you again?" Vincent's throat tightened as he answered. "When this is all over, when you're safe with people who love you properly, maybe we'll cross paths again." As federal agents led the trafficking suspects away in handcuffs, Vincent watched Emma walk hand in hand with a victim services coordinator toward the elevator. She turned back once to wave at him, and Vincent felt something shift inside his chest. For 35 years, he'd been the man parents warned their children about. Today, for the first time in decades, he'd been the man a child ran to for protection. Detective Morrison approached him again as the scene wound down. "The feds are going to want to debrief you. This trafficking ring, it's bigger than just local operations. International connections, political corruption, the whole nightmare." Vincent nodded absently, his eyes still following Emma as she disappeared into the elevator. "Whatever they need." "Vincent," Morrison said quietly, "what you did here today, blocking that exit, keeping that child safe until we could respond, that's going to save more lives than you know." Vincent's men had gathered around their vehicles, waiting for his signal to leave. Tony Marcelli approached with the kind of respectful distance his soldiers always maintained. "Boss, we good to go?" Vincent looked around the garage one final time, seeing it not as the site of a business meeting gone wrong, but as the place where a child's desperate whisper had changed everything. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we're good." As Vincent's convoy pulled out of the Meridian shopping complex, emergency vehicles and federal task force units were still arriving. The investigation that would follow would uncover a trafficking network spanning 12 countries, result in over 200 arrests, and rescue 43 children from situations similar to Emma's. But Vincent Torino, driving through the streets of a city where his word had been law for decades, was thinking about something much simpler. Sometimes the most important battles weren't fought for territory or profit or respect. Sometimes they were fought for a barefoot little girl who whispered, "He's not my dad," to a stranger in a parking garage. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those were the battles that reminded you who you really were underneath all the things you'd done to survive. Emma Rose Patterson would grow up safe, surrounded by people who chose to love her instead of people who saw her as merchandise. And somewhere in the city, a man who'd spent his life being dangerous had learned what it felt like to be a hero, even if it was just for one afternoon in a parking garage where the only thing that mattered was making sure a child made it home. 3 months after Emma's rescue, Vincent received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of a man in a dark suit standing next to a little girl, both of them smiling. At the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for saving me." Vincent stared at that drawing for a long time, sitting in his office above the restaurant that served as his legitimate front. The federal investigation had concluded, resulting in convictions that would keep Emma's traffickers behind bars for life. The fake David Patterson had cooperated fully, providing details that helped authorities dismantle similar operations in 6 other states. But something about Emma's case had stayed with Vincent in ways he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way she'd trusted him completely in that moment of terror. Maybe it was how her small hand had felt in his, reminding him of holding his daughter Sophia's hand during those final hospital visits. Tony knocked on the office door, interrupting his thoughts. "Boss, we got a situation." "Another one." Vincent looked up sharply. "What kind of situation?" Police scanner picked up something. Missing kid case, but the details sound familiar. 7-year-old boy disappeared from a playground in Queens yesterday. Witnesses saw him leave with a woman claiming to be his aunt. Family says he doesn't have an aunt. Vincent's jaw tightened. The trafficking network they'd exposed had tentacles everywhere, and cutting off one head often meant others grew back stronger and more careful. "Where's the investigation centered?" "Astoria. Detective Morrison's working the case. He asked if you might be willing to consult." Vincent stood, straightening his tie. Over the past 3 months, he'd developed an unofficial relationship with law enforcement that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. His knowledge of criminal networks, combined with his willingness to act outside legal constraints when necessary, had made him a valuable asset in cases involving child exploitation. "Tell Morrison I'll meet him in an hour." The Astoria precinct was buzzing with activity when Vincent arrived. Officers moved with the urgent efficiency that marked high-priority cases, phones ringing constantly as tips and leads poured in. Detective Morrison met him at the front desk, his face grim with exhaustion. "Vincent, thanks for coming. This one's got similarities to Emma's case that are making my skin crawl." They walked toward Morrison's desk, passing bulletin boards covered with photos and timelines. Vincent's trained eye picked out the patterns immediately. Professional execution, carefully planned abduction, minimal witnesses. "Tell me about the boy." "Marcus Williams, 7 years old. Lives with his grandmother because his mother's in rehab. Yesterday afternoon, he was playing at Astoria Park when a woman approached him. Told him his grandmother had been in an accident and she was there to take him to the hospital." Vincent's blood chilled. The same manipulation tactics, the same age target, the same exploitation of a child's trust and confusion. Witnesses? 3 people saw the interaction. All described the woman as professional-looking, well-dressed, spoke with authority. Marcus went with her willingly because she knew his name and his grandmother's name, made it seem legitimate. Morrison handed Vincent a file folder containing witness statements and security camera footage. The images were grainy, but Vincent could see the calculated precision in how the woman had approached Marcus. She'd studied him, learned his routines, identified his vulnerabilities. "This isn't random," Vincent said after reviewing the materials. "Someone's rebuilt the network." "That's what I was afraid of." The federal task force shut down the international connections, but the local infrastructure might have survived. Different players? Same methods. Vincent's phone buzzed with a text from Frank DeMarco. "Boss, got something you need to see. Meet me at the warehouse district, Pier 47. Vincent showed the message to Morrison. "My people might have found something. You want to come along?" Morrison nodded grimly. "Let's go bring this kid home. Sometimes a single moment changes everything." Vincent Torino had built an empire on fear and violence, but 3 whispered words from a terrified child transformed the most dangerous man in the city into something he never thought he'd be again: a protector. Emma's rescue exposed an international trafficking network and saved dozens of children. But more than that, it proved that heroes can emerge from the darkest places when someone has the courage to ask for help and someone else has the courage to answer.